Hello, my name is Arthur Julius Pendragon, and today I'm going to talk about the rule changes for Yu-Gi-Oh!, which have been revealed to us today. The information this is based on is coming from the weekly Shonen Jump magazine via the organisation, links for which are in the description. So, why are Konami adding new rules and a new summoning mechanic? Well, starting with 5D's inclusion of synchro monsters, there has been a tradition of adding a new summon mechanic with each iteration of a Yu-Gi-Oh! Anime series. Zexal subsequently added XCs, and Arcfied added Pendulums. With the announcement of the new series called Vrains, we've been anticipating a rule update or a new summoning mechanic for some time. There's actually been a few rumours knocking around, you might have heard. It has been rumoured that they would be increasing the life points, changing the pendulum mechanic, that sort of thing. None of that has been confirmed. What has been confirmed is what I'm going to be talking about in this video. Now, as I said, we've been anticipating a rule update or a new summoning mechanic, and in fact we have been given both. Now, before I talk about the new rules, I want to talk a little bit about the state of the game in order to try and set the context for these new rules that have just been introduced or are just being introduced. So for the last few years, Yu-Gi-Oh! Meta has been dominated by decks which are able to efficiently and quickly fill the field with extra deck monsters, many of which are extremely powerful or which cause serious problems for the opponent. The direction that Yu-Gi-Oh! Took was an important step in moving us on from a very slow chance-based game to a much faster, more interesting and more combo-oriented one. Now, while this is largely a positive thing, many players do complain that the game has gotten way too fast, particularly with the introduction of pendulum monsters. Now, in my experience, games and matches still take a long time, but that is simply because individual turns themselves have been taking a lot longer because we've got a lot more drawn out combos and things like that, and also players would set up difficult fields that the opponent has to really think about how to deal with, and that's not necessarily such a problem, but the arguments that people are making are completely valid. Nowhere is this more obvious than with the introduction of the latest meta deck, Zodiacs. In the OCG in Asia, the latest ban list has tried to slow them down, but the statistics show that all this has really done is pushed people into playing more mixed archetype zoos, and they're still dominating the game. That then brings us to the new rules and the latest summoning mechanic, because believe me, this is going to put a stop to all of that. So, the newest monster type is called the Link monster. This is a particularly interesting addition, and we'll take a look at it in just a moment. First, however, we need to address the field. The field has been changed a couple of times throughout the history of the game, and the field that we're used to now, following the introduction of pendulums, is this one. So it has collectively 10 monster zones, 10 spell trap zones, 2 field spell zones, 2 graves, and 4 pendulum zones. Now, let's take a look at the new field. So as you can see, everything looks nice and neat again. We have 10 normal monster zones and 10 spell trap zones. The first thing you'll notice is either going to be the inclusion of 2 new zones at the top, or the complete lack of a separate set of pendulum zones. As you can see, pendulums now take up 2 spell and trap zones. Now this does not mean that spells and traps have been limited to 3, that was my first reaction when I first saw this, but you can place spells and traps in the pendulum zones, but if you do, you've locked out that pendulum zone. So this is a really important change because it means that you have to be really careful if you're playing a pendulum deck. Do you need this spell and trap zone, or do you need this pendulum zone? So I think that's going to make a lot of changes to pendulums. It's not quite as drastic as the anticipated can't pendulum summon in the first turn as was rumoured, but it certainly does make a very interesting and quite a big change in my opinion. But the second change, and this one is the most important, is the inclusion of the extra monster zones, or link zones as I've been calling them, at the top of each player's field. And as you can see, there are only 2 of them, and they're between the 2 players. So this brings us to the most important part of the new rules. And this is what is really going to change the game. According to the new rules, you may not special summon monsters from the extra deck to the normal monster zones. Instead, you can only summon them from the extra deck into these extra zones. And additionally, once you've summoned a monster into a link zone, the other zone becomes locked out to you, and it's now reserved to your opponent. Now this does not mean that you can only summon one extra deck monster. Rather, it brings us to the purpose of link monsters. If you summon a link monster to the link zone, you can then summon extra deck monsters to any linked monster zones in the normal monster zone area. So what this basically means is that if you want to fill your field with extra monsters, you're going to have to establish these links first. And that does not break the game, but it does slow it down, and it does change it. So I know at this point you're probably going to be quite confused, so let's take a look at this new monster type so that we can get a grasp of what all of this means. So this is the first link monster which has been revealed. As you can see, I've made a sort of English translation, so I do apologise for some of the crudeness in it. This is not exactly how it's going to look when they're released, but it gives us a good indication of what they're sort of going to be like. Now, as you can see, they do have a blue frame, which is similar to Rituals, but it's going to be darker than this. This is the image from Shonen Jump. As you can see, it's a slightly darker blue, so you can distinguish them from Ritual monsters. There are a few other differences, and you'll notice them immediately. Now, first of all, I'll just say that this is the first Link monster revealed, and this one is going to be used by the new protagonist, Yusaku. And as you can see, basically, there are a few differences to other types of monsters. They do not have a defense stat. As you can see, that's been replaced by the word Link 3 in this case, so their Link number. Because they don't have a defense, they cannot actually change their position. They can't be in any position other than attack position. They can't be face down, and they can't be in defense position. And Book of Moon doesn't work on them. They just can't change their state. They're always in attack position. Now, according to the new rules, you summon link monsters by sending materials on the field equal to their link number. This has been quite confusing, but I think I basically grasp it now. You can additionally send monsters listed on the card text to the graveyard. So in this case, you either have to send 3 monsters because it's a link 3, or as you can see in the card text, you can send 2 effect monsters. So other ones will probably be more specific, like you can send, as you can see, they actually have there's a new type here, Cybers. You might get one that says, say it's a link 3, so send 3 monsters, or you can send 2 Cybers monsters instead. So it's just 2 different ways you can summon them. And additionally, a link monster which is used in the summon of another link monster can substitute that many of materials equal to its link number. So if you have a link 3 monster like this, and you want to summon a link 4, I think you could use 1 link 3 monster plus 1 other material which equals link 4. So yeah, link 3 plus 1 monster, link 4. Another thing that sticks out to us is the inclusion of these arrows on the card portrait. There are 8 in total, 4 diagonal and 1 up, 1 down, 1 left and 1 right. The red arrows actually indicate the links that this monster creates. That's why they are link monsters. This means that if this card is in a monster zone, any monster zone which is adjacent to it, indicated by the red arrows, that's where it creates the link, so they're linked to him. And any monster in those zones can be used for its card effects. So for example, with this Decode Talker, he has an effect where he gains 500 attack for each monster linked to him. So if you place him in the link zone like this, and then you have a monster in a zone which his arrows are pointing to, he will gain 500 attack for each of those monsters. The other important feature of the links is that you can summon an extra deck monster from the extra deck in any zone that is linked. So in other words, if you want to summon multiple monsters from the extra deck, you first need a link established, and you need to summon link monsters both in the link zone and on the main field. It's this mechanic which limits the speed of the game and the player's ability to summon from the extra deck. It doesn't stop it, but you have to, first of all, you're going to have to put these link monsters in your extra deck, so you're giving up card space in that extra deck, and also you have to bring these things out onto the field before you can spam the field with your extra deck monsters. You need to have a connection to that link zone. Now, on a side note, they have said that you can special summon extra deck monsters from the graveyard to the normal monster zones without a link. So if you summon if you summon a monster, it goes to the graveyard, and then you soul charge, you can bring those extra deck monsters from the graveyard onto the normal zones. They don't need to be connected. That does indicate that you're going to have to keep track of which monsters have been summoned from the grave and which ones have been summoned from the extra deck, so you know whether they're legally allowed to be in that place, whether they're connected via a link or not. And I expect that we're going to see some interesting combos where you, say, summon a monster from the extra deck, send it to the graveyard, and then bring it back onto the field. So that could be quite interesting to see. What's the implication for these new changes then? Well, in my opinion, a lot of decks that have not been able to top because they couldn't compete against those which can mass summon from the extra deck will now have a much better time. So decks that use ritual summons like Prediction Princess Subterras, I imagine, will come to the fore in this format, because they're not being limited by this new mechanic. And according to the information from the organisation, Konami's intention was to dampen Zodiacs and to make the new Tyranno deck the new OCG meta. So obviously we can see that monsters that are decks that are graveyard focused or just purely main deck focused are going to be doing a lot better. They're going to actually be able to compete with OP extra deck decks. So whatever you think of this new mechanic, in my opinion, it's going to lead to a much more varied and far more interesting plays and combos, and I think we will see decks that are more about the main deck doing a lot better. Now, there is potential here for this mechanic to it's gonna power creep, and it could end up being even more OP than previous mechanics were, but I think certainly initially the first reaction from it is going to be a change for a good, a balance to the game, a bit more balance. Now, in fact, I do wonder if something like Monarchs might be brought back from the brink, because being able to prevent link establishment could be really important, through the use of the domain lock. So it will be interesting to see what sort of decks come back and come to the fore in this format. So that's basically everything I have to show you and have to talk about today. Thanks for watching, and if you want to have a look at all this information in detail for yourself and check my sources, please follow the links in the description. So thanks, guys.